The latch on the north gate had been loose 3 weeks. I knew that. I'd told myself every one of those 21 mornings that today was the day I'd finally see to it. And every one of those 21 evenings, something else had wanted doing worse. And so the latch stayed loose. And I stayed the kind of tired that doesn't have room left over for gates. I'm telling you about a gate before I've told you anything else, because that's exactly what I was thinking about, standing at my own kitchen window that night, watching the storm come in low and mean over the west field. Not the storm. Not the crop I hadn't brought in fast enough. The gate. Grief and worry are peculiar housemates. They let the smallest, stupidest things sit right at the front of your mind, while the large things wait politely behind it. My husband's been 3 years gone. Fever, not war, which people always assume first out here near Ashbourne, given how many men this valley's lost to fighting over the years. Just a fever, ordinary and thorough. It took him in 9 days and left me a farm I never asked to run, alone, and a daughter I lost even longer before that. In a raid so old now, I sometimes go whole weeks without the weight of it landing on me fresh. I don't talk about her much. I'm not going to dwell on it here either, except to say that some nights, storms particularly, I still find myself listening for a sound a baby makes, 12 years gone or not. Anyway, the gate. It came just past the worst of the thunder, 3 hard knocks, flat-palmed. The kind that means somebody's desperate rather than lost. I stood there a second, with my hand on the kettle, deciding whether I was fool enough to answer a door at that hour in weather like that, alone, with nothing but a kitchen knife and whatever nerve I had left in me. I opened it anyway. I've never been much good at leaving something frightened on my own step, whatever the sense of it. 3 orc women stood there, soaked through past any use a hood or cloak might have been, mud to the knee, breathing hard in the particular way of people who've been running a long while and only just allowed themselves to stop. The tallest held herself slightly in front of the other 2, not blocking them exactly, just positioned the way you position yourself when you've spent years being the one who goes first. "We need shelter," she said. Common, careful, each word set down like she was paying for it. "1 night. We'll not trouble you past that." I looked past her at the storm, at the 2 behind her, one young enough to still be shivering more from fear than cold, the other watching the tree line behind them like she expected it to move. "Get in," I said, "before I lose all the warmth I've got left in this kitchen arguing about it." What I had wasn't much. 3 towels that had seen better decades, a pot of barley soup I stretched with water, and the last of an onion. Bread 2 days stale, edible if you didn't examine it too closely. I set it all down without ceremony. The way you feed people who look like eating in front of an audience might undo something in them if you made a fuss of it. They gave their names while they ate. Yenna, the tallest, the one who'd spoken at the door, grey starting through her braid, though she couldn't have been much past 40. Sora, younger, quicker to look up at every sound the storm made against the shutters. And Vika, the quiet one, dark-eyed, who ate slowly and kept glancing at something on my kitchen wall I couldn't work out at first. It was the sampler. My mother's needlework, framed and hung by the hearth 30 years back. Some old pattern of thread and initials she'd stitched before I was even born. Vika's eyes kept going back to it, and then to me, and then back to the stitching, like she was working out a sum that wasn't coming out the way she'd expected. I didn't think much of it at the time. I'd have thought a great deal of stranger things than a tired traveller staring at needlework that particular night. "Thank you," Yenna said, once the bowls were empty. "You did not have to." "No," I agreed. I didn't. I gave them the floor by the fire, same as I'd have given anyone that night, and sat up myself a while after, mending a torn seam I'd been putting off, same as the gate. Because apparently I do all my avoiding in one long list, and only get to it when the house is full of strangers, and I can't sleep anyway. Vika didn't sleep either. I noticed her sitting up against the hearthstone a good while after her sisters had gone quiet, staring at that sampler again in the low firelight. "That stitching," she said finally, low enough not to wake the others. "The pattern along the border. I have seen it before." "My mother's work," I said. "Old family pattern. Nothing more remarkable than that, I shouldn't think." She was quiet a long moment. Turning something over, I could see it in her face. The way a person's expression goes distant when they're doing arithmetic they'd rather not be doing. "Perhaps," she said eventually. "It has likely been stitched 1,000 times over, by 1,000 mothers who never knew each other. I am tired. My eyes are playing tricks with the firelight." She didn't say anything else that night, but I noticed, before I finally went to my own bed, that she'd shifted her seat slightly, so that she could still see the sampler from where she lay, and that she hadn't taken her eyes off it again until I blew out the last candle. I didn't know that night what she was looking at. I want to be honest and tell you I didn't work it out for days yet, not properly. But I've thought back on it so many times since that I sometimes believe I felt something shift in that kitchen before I had any right to understand what it was. Morning came in pale and wrung out, the way it does after a storm's had its full say overnight. I was up before any of them, same as always, and had the fire going and the last of the bread cut before Sora came to the window and went very still. "Riders," she said. "On the low road. 4, maybe 5. I came to look. Distant yet, but moving with a particular unhurried patience I'd learned, over the years, to read as trouble taking its time, rather than trouble in any rush. Yenna was beside me a breath later, though I hadn't heard her cross the room. "How far?" she said. Not really a question, more a measurement she was taking out loud. "Half a mile, perhaps less by the time they reached the fork." She was quiet a moment, doing whatever some 3 sisters running from something learned to do fast and without much fuss. "We'll go," she said. "We've troubled you enough already, and I'll not have whatever's chasing us land on your gate as well." "Sit down," I said, surprised myself saying it. "You're not walking back out into open country in front of mounted men in daylight. Not on my account, and not on yours either. I should tell you, before this goes further, what I already half suspected and had confirmed within the hour. The riders belonged to a man named Gareth Voss, who I'd heard of the way you hear of men like that in a valley this size, second-hand, at a distance, with a particular carefulness in how people said his name. He worked for coin, mostly. Retrieval is the word people used, though what got retrieved and from whom depended entirely on who was paying. He had a reputation for finishing what he started and for not asking too many questions about why a client wanted a thing found. Yenna told me the whole of it plainly, sitting at my table with her hands wrapped round a cup of tea gone cold. Their clan had held to an old peace agreement for near 30 years, land left untouched, certain crossings kept open on both sides, an arrangement her grandmother had helped broker before Yenna was even born. A lord 2 valleys over had decided, recently, that the agreement no longer suited him, and had moved to break it by the simplest method available, removing everyone who could still testify to its original terms. "There were 11 of us," she said, "in the settlement, when the men came." She didn't say more than that straight off, and I didn't ask her to. Some numbers carry their own weight without needing the rest of the sentence spoken. 3 of you left, I said, eventually. 3 of us reached the tree line, she said. I do not know, some days, if that counts as the same thing as left. Vika had gone very quiet through all of this, sitting by the window, with her eyes more on my kitchen wall than on the riders somewhere beyond it. I caught her looking at the sampler again, the same careful, troubled look from the night before. And this time I said something about it, plainly, because I've never had much patience for a thing left unsaid too long in my own house. You keep looking at that stitching, I said. Same as last night. If there's something you want to ask me about it, you're welcome to. She looked at me a long moment. I watched her decide something, the way you watch a person's face change shape around a choice before they've spoken a word of it. It is nothing, she said, finally. An old pattern. I told you as much last night. My eyes playing tricks with firelight, and now with worry on top of it. Riders on the road make a person see meaning in things that have none. I didn't believe her. I want to be honest about that. But I've raised no children of my own since the one I lost, and I've buried a husband. And somewhere in all of that, I learned a person doesn't always get told the truth the first time they ask for it, and pressing too hard only ever teaches somebody to lie better the second time. So I let it go. For then. Sora, watching this whole exchange from the doorway, caught my eye for just a second. And there was something in her face, too. Something that matched Vika's too closely to be coincidence, though neither of them said a further word about it that morning. The riders didn't stop that first day, as it happened, passed along the low road at their unhurried pace, and carried on toward Ashbourne proper. And I watched from my own window, with my heart going harder than I'd have liked to admit, until they'd shrunk to nothing against the grey horizon. They'll ask in the village, Yenna said behind me, whether anyone's seen 3 orc women travelling together. Someone will remember the storm, remember strangers on the road that night. It will not take Voss long to work out which direction we came from. Then we've a day, perhaps 2, I said, before he comes asking here directly. She nodded, didn't argue the point, which told me she'd already done the same arithmetic herself, probably several times over. You should let us go before that happens, she said. I meant what I said this morning. Whatever this becomes, I'll not have it become yours to carry. I looked at her a long moment. This woman who'd lost 8 of her own people, to men exactly like the ones who'd just ridden past my gate, still trying, even now, to spare a stranger the weight of it. My husband's 3 years gone, I said. My daughter longer than that. In a raid not so very different, I'd wager, from whatever took your 8. I've had a great deal of practice carrying weight nobody asked me to carry, Yenna. I find I've gotten rather particular about which weight I choose these days. And this one's mine now, whether you like it or not. She didn't have an answer for that. I don't think she'd expected one from me, and I don't think, looking back, that I'd fully expected it from myself either. But I meant it. Every word. And some part of me, some part I hadn't examined too closely yet, already suspected I meant it, for reasons that went a good deal deeper than simple decency. The second night settled in quieter than the first. Though quiet isn't quite the word for a house with 3 fugitives asleep by the fire, and a hired man somewhere out there working out which road to ride down next. Yenna and Sora had gone to sleep early, worn thin from the day's watching. Vika hadn't. I found her again by the hearth. Same spot. Same look aimed at my mother's old needlework. And I decided that night I wasn't leaving that room until one of us said something honest. I sat down across from her. Didn't say anything at first. Just let the fire do its work a while, the way it does, loosening things in people that a direct question never quite manages to loosen on its own. 12 years ago, I said, eventually, I lost a daughter. Not to fever, not to age. A raid came through this valley, burned 3 farms, including a neighbor's I'd been staying at while my husband was away trading. I had her with me. I was carrying her when the fire started. And in all the running and the smoke and the screaming, I lost hold of her. And by the time anyone thought to look, there was nothing left to find but ash and a blanket half burned through. I hadn't said all of that aloud in years. Not the whole of it, not in one go. It came out steadier than I expected, though my hands weren't quite as steady as my voice. I'm telling you this, I said, because you've looked at that stitching on my wall twice now, like it means something to you. And I think it's time you told me what. She didn't answer straight off. Reached instead into an inner pocket of her traveling coat, the same coat she'd arrived in, soaked through 2 nights before, and drew out a scrap of cloth, folded small and soft with age, carried so long it had gone thin at the fold lines, the way cloth does when it's been opened and closed 1,000 times over by careful hands. She held it out. I took it without quite understanding why my own hands had started shaking before I'd even unfolded it. The stitching matched. I want to tell you plainly, without any drama in the telling, because there wasn't any drama in the moment itself, just a cold, quiet certainty settling into my chest as I turned that scrap of burned, half-ruined blanket over in the firelight and saw my own mother's border pattern worked into the corner of it. The exact same pattern, hanging framed not 6 feet away. I was in that valley, Vika said. Her voice had gone very careful, very measured, the voice of someone who has rehearsed a confession so many times in her own head that saying it aloud finally feels almost unreal. 12 years passed. We were not raiding. We were fleeing our own trouble that season, cutting through unfamiliar country in a hurry. I heard a child crying in the smoke of a burning farmhouse. I did not think. I went in. I could not carry her far, she said. We were being hunted ourselves that week, and a human infant slowed everything. And I want you to understand, I knew this, even as I did it, that keeping her with us might have gotten her killed alongside the rest of us within the month. There was a chapel 2 days' walk from where I found her. Sisters there, human sisters, who took in children with nowhere else to go. I left her on their step, with that scrap of blanket tucked in beside her, because it was the only thing of her old life I had to give her. And I have carried the rest of it. The burned corner, the pattern, the not knowing what became of her after, for 12 years. I sat with the blanket in my hands a long while before I trusted myself to speak. She's alive, I said. Not really to Vika, more to the fire, to the room, to 12 years of a grief I'd built my whole shape around, learning to carry it, the way you learn to carry anything heavy enough, badly at first, and then simply as part of how you stand. She's alive, and she's been alive this whole time, and I have spent 12 years visiting a grave that never had anything in it but a burned blanket I never found. Vika didn't try to comfort me. I think she understood, somehow, that comfort wasn't the thing I needed in that moment, that what I needed was simply to sit with the size of it a while, the way you sit with any news too large to process standing up. I do not know what became of her after the chapel, she said, eventually, quiet and plain. I never went back. I told myself it was kinder not to, that a life started fresh shouldn't have an orc woman turning up every few years to remind it of a burning farmhouse. I have wondered, more nights than I can count, whether that was wisdom or cowardice. I have never settled the question. Where? I said. Where was this chapel? 2 days east of the old river crossing. A place called Millhaven, if it still stands. I cannot promise you it does. 12 years is a long time, and I do not know what's become of it since, any more than I know what's become of her. I looked down at the blanket in my hands, that small, ruined, impossibly precious scrap of cloth, and felt something shift in my chest that I hadn't felt move in 12 years. Not grief, exactly. Something with an edge of grief still in it, but pointed forward now instead of only back. We didn't sleep much, either of us, the rest of that night. Talked instead, low voices by a dying fire, working out the shape of a thing neither of us had expected to be working out together. There was Voss to consider. That hadn't gone away simply because a larger truth had arrived to sit beside it. He'd be asking in Ashbourne by now, working his way toward my gate on his own unhurried schedule. And 3 orc women couldn't simply vanish east toward Millhaven in broad daylight, without every rider in his employ knowing exactly which road to follow. We'll need a reason to travel that nobody questions, Yenna said, once we'd woken her and Sora and laid the whole of it out plain. She'd taken the news of Millhaven with the same careful stillness she seemed to take most things, though I caught her eyes on Vika a long moment, something unspoken passing between 2 sisters who'd clearly carried this particular secret very differently from each other, the 12 long years. A widow travelling with kin to visit family east of the river, I said. Nobody looks twice at that. 3 orc women travelling alone. They'll look at plenty. You would come, Vika said. Not quite a question. I buried an empty grave for 12 years, I said. I'm not sending 3 strangers off alone to find out whether the rest of what's in it is real. Not when it's mine to go and see for myself. Sora, quiet through most of the night's talk, spoke up then, for almost the first time since the riders had passed the day before. Voss will still be looking for 3 orc women, she said. Not 4 travellers, one of them human, moving together with a reasonable story. She looked round at the rest of us. It might be the safest way through in the end, hiding in plain sight of exactly what he isn't looking for. Yenna considered that and nodded, slow. Then we leave before first light, she said. All 4 of us, together. We left before the sky had properly decided what colour it wanted to be that morning, somewhere between black and the first grey suggestion of dawn. 4 of us on the road east, with what little we could carry, and a story about family, and a river crossing that I'd practiced in my head the whole of the night before. I locked the farmhouse, fed the chickens extra in case it was a week before anyone got back to tend them properly. Left the loose gate latch exactly as loose as it had been 3 weeks running, because apparently, even a life turned entirely upside down doesn't make a person suddenly good at gates. I noticed myself thinking about that latch again, walking away from my own front step in the near dark. I've decided, since, that a mind under real strain will always find some small, ordinary thing to worry at, the way a tongue finds a loose tooth, because the large thing is too big to hold steady in your hands for very long at a stretch. Yenna walked point, same as she had at my door 2 nights before. Sora came last, watching the road behind us more than the road ahead. Vika walked beside me, and I noticed, an hour or so in, that she'd fallen into step exactly matching my own pace, neither faster nor slower, the careful rhythm of someone minding another person's stride, without being asked to. I didn't see any of what happened in Ashbourne that morning, of course. I've had it told to me since, pieced together from what people were willing to say once the whole business was over, and telling the truth about it no longer carried any particular risk. Gareth Voss rode into the village a little past dawn, same unhurried patience as always, and asked his questions of exactly the people you'd expect. The miller, the innkeeper, old Mrs. Aldous, who sees most of what passes through Ashbourne, one way or another. 3 orc women, travelling together, seen recently. Someone would have mentioned the storm. Someone would have mentioned a widow's farm at the north edge of the valley, because villagers don't keep secrets well, even when they mean to. What Voss found, when he finally rode up my own empty track sometime past midday, was a locked door, well-fed chickens, and a farm that looked exactly like what it was meant to look like. A woman gone visiting kin. Nothing more remarkable than that. I don't know exactly what he made of it, but I know, from what people told me after, that he didn't linger long, and that he rode east himself within the hour. Which meant one of 2 things. Either he'd worked out our direction from some sign I hadn't thought to hide, or he was simply covering every road on principle, the way a thorough man does when he hasn't got a better lead to follow. Either way, he was somewhere behind us on that same road east, and none of the 4 of us knew it yet. We made poor time that second day, if I'm honest. Not from any lack of will, simply from the ordinary friction of 4 people who'd known each other 2 days, trying to move as one body across unfamiliar country. A boot that wanted relacing, a stream crossing that took longer to find a safe ford through than any of us would have liked. Sora's insistence, twice, on doubling back a short way to be certain nothing was following that we hadn't already accounted for. Vika and I talked more that second day than we had the whole of the first 2 put together. She told me small things about the settlement she'd lost. Not the raid itself, she never dwelt long on that, but ordinary things. The shape of the roof over where she'd slept as a girl, a particular tree her mother had planted the year she was born. I found myself telling her, in turn, about my husband. Not the fever that took him, but the ordinary shape of him before it. The way he used to whistle off-key, doing the milking, and never once notice he was doing it. There's a particular kind of closeness that grows fast between people carrying the same size of grief, even when the grief itself has entirely different shapes. I hadn't expected to find that on a road east with a woman I'd known 3 days. I found it anyway. "You are not what I expected," Vika said, somewhere in the middle of that second afternoon. "When I first saw you, standing in your own doorway with a kitchen knife you did not know how to properly hold." "I've never needed to hold one properly," I said. "Mostly, I've just needed people to believe I would." She laughed at that. A real laugh, short and surprised out of her, the first I'd heard from any of them since they'd arrived on my step, soaked through and running. We came over the last rise late on the 3rd day, the light going long and gold the way it does in early autumn. And there it was, below us, in a shallow valley bend. A scatter of grey stone buildings around a chapel with a squat, sturdy tower, smoke rising from several chimneys, the whole of it smaller than I'd somehow built it up to be in my own head, across 3 days of walking toward it. Millhaven. Still standing, 12 years on, which was more certainty than any of us had actually been promised going in. I stood at the top of that rise a long moment, just looking at it. Somewhere down there, or somewhere that had once been down there, was whatever remained of the first 12 years of a daughter I'd buried an empty grave for. I didn't know her name anymore. if she'd even kept the one I'd given her. I didn't know her face, her height, the sound of her voice. I knew only that she'd existed, once, in my arms, and that a scrap of burned blanket in my coat pocket was the only proof I had that any of it had been real. "We should not go down as four," Sora said, practical even now, even here. "A widow and her kin arriving at a chapel known for taking in orphans. It will draw questions we may not want asked in front of the wrong ears." Yenna nodded slow agreement. "Two of us will wait at the tree line. Rosalind should go in. And—" She looked at Vika a long moment, something unspoken passing between them again, same as it had that first night by my fire. "I think it should be Vika beside her. She is owed that much, whatever the sisters inside remember or don't." Vika didn't argue it. I watched her take a slow breath, the kind you take before a door you've been afraid to knock on for 12 years, and fall into step beside me as we started down the long slope toward the chapel bells, just beginning, faintly, to ring the evening hour. The chapel door was oak, old and grey with age, and it opened before I'd properly finished knocking, the way doors do in places used to strangers arriving at odd hours with nowhere else to go. The woman who answered was elderly, robed plain, a face that had clearly spent decades being kind to people it had no particular reason to trust yet. She looked at me, then at Vika beside me, and something in her expression didn't so much as flicker at the sight of an orc woman standing on her step, which told me plenty about the sort of place this actually was. "I'm looking," I said, and found my voice wasn't quite as steady as I'd have liked. "For a child left here 12 years past. A girl. She'd have been perhaps a few months old." The woman, Sister Aldrich, she told us, once we were seated in a small stone room off the main chapel, tea brought without being asked for, same as I'd offered these 3 strangers 2 nights before, went very still at that. 12 years, she said. "That would be before my time here, nearly. I came the year after, as it happens. But there is one among the older sisters who'd remember, if anyone does." "Is she—" I couldn't finish the question straight off. Had to start it again. "Is the girl still here?" Sister Aldrich's face did something careful and complicated, the particular expression of someone deciding how much of a hard truth to give a stranger all at once. "Let me fetch Sister Margaret," she said. "She'll want to tell you herself." Sister Margaret was older still, moved slow, and sat across from us a long moment before she said anything at all, studying my face and then Vika's, with an attention that felt less like suspicion and more like a woman carefully checking her own memory against what stood in front of her. "A girl left on our step. Autumn. 12 years back," she said, finally. "Wrapped in a burned scrap of blanket. I remember it plainly, because it isn't often a child comes to us marked so clearly by whatever she'd survived to get here." Her eyes went to Vika. "And I remember, too, that the one who left her didn't simply set her down and go. She stayed at the tree line the better part of a day, watching the chapel, before she finally walked on. I saw her from the upstairs window. I've wondered, more than once over the years, what became of her." "I did not think anyone had seen me," Vika said, low. "I did not think it my place to call out," Sister Margaret said. "A person watching that carefully, that long, plainly needed the leaving to be her own choice, made in her own time. I let her have it." I sat with my hands wrapped tight round a teacup I wasn't drinking from, waiting for the part of this I actually needed to hear. "The girl," I said. "Please. Is she still here?" Sister Margaret's face softened, and for one terrible second I thought I already knew, from her expression alone, what she was about to say. That 12 years and childhood fevers and all the ordinary cruelty of the world had already taken what I'd walked 3 days to find. "She is not here today," she said. "But she is not lost to you, Rosalind Farrow. She is apprenticed to the healer in the village proper, not a mile from this chapel. Her name is Elsie. She is alive, and she is well, and she has asked, more than once over the years, whether anyone ever came looking for her." I don't remember, if I'm honest, exactly what I said in the minute after that. I know I was crying, properly, the kind that comes up from somewhere lower than the chest and takes the whole body with it. I know Vika's hand found my shoulder at some point, steady and careful, the same way she'd matched my stride on the road 3 days running. "A mile," I said, eventually, once I'd found enough breath to make words again. "She's a mile from here." She's been a mile from here for who knows how long, and I have spent 12 years visiting an empty grave. "You could not have known," Vika said. "I made certain of that 12 years ago, thinking it the kindest thing I could do for her. I've wondered every year since whether it was kindness or simply my own fear wearing kindness as a coat. I do not have an answer even now, sitting here." "It doesn't matter now," I said, and found, saying it, that I actually meant it. Grief and gratitude tangled so close together in my chest, I couldn't have pulled them apart if I'd tried. Whatever it was, she's alive. She's a mile away. Nothing else in this room matters more than that. Not tonight. Sister Margaret watched the two of us a long moment, something gentle and knowing in her old face. "The village healer's cottage is easily found," she said. "But it's growing late, and the road back to the tree line where your sisters wait isn't one I'd want either." Of you walking after dark, not with riders reportedly asking after orc women on the roads south of here. I went very still at that. "Riders," I said. "Here? Already?" "This morning," Sister Margaret said. "A hard-looking man asking after 3 orc women travelling with a human woman. I told him nothing, because I had nothing true to tell him at the time. I don't believe that will satisfy him for long." We left the chapel at a near run, all the joy of the last hour gone sharp and urgent all at once. Because whatever grace we'd been given in finally finding Elsie meant nothing at all if Gareth Voss found the rest of us first. Yenna and Sora were exactly where we'd left them, tense and watchful at the tree line, and I watched Yenna's face change the instant she read ours. First alarm at the speed we were moving, then something else entirely, when Vika, breathless, got the words out. "She's alive," Vika said. "Rosalind's daughter." "A mile from here, apprenticed to a healer, alive and well and asking after us for years without knowing it." Yenna's composure cracked, just slightly, just for a moment. The first real crack I'd seen in her the whole 3 days I'd known her. She caught herself quick, the way a person does who's spent a long time being the steady one for everybody else's sake. But I saw it before she smoothed it back down. "There is no time to celebrate it properly," Sora said, urgent, already scanning the road behind us. "Foss was here this morning. He'll be back, or someone working for him will be, and soon." "Then we don't celebrate yet," Yenna said. "We move. Tonight. Straight to this healer's cottage, and we get Elsie somewhere safer than a village Voss already knows to search, before he has the chance to work out what we found here." She looked round at the 4 of us. 5, in every way that mattered now, though none of us had said so aloud yet. And something settled in her face, resolved and certain. "We've come this far," she said. "We are not losing her again in the last mile." The cottage sat at the edge of the village proper, a single lamp burning in the window, and I stopped a good 10 feet from the door with my whole body suddenly refusing to carry me any closer. "I don't know what to say to her," I said. 12 years of imagining this moment, and standing at the actual door of it, I found every word I'd ever rehearsed had simply gone. Vika stood beside me, steady, the way she'd been steady the whole length of that road. "You do not need the right words," she said. "You only need to knock." I knocked. The girl who opened it was tall for her age, dark-haired, an apron dusted with dried herb tied round her waist, and she looked at the two of us on her step with polite, unhurried curiosity. A healer's apprentice's face, used to strangers arriving at odd hours needing something. "Can I help you?" she said. I couldn't answer straight off. I was looking at her eyes. My husband's eyes, exactly, the particular grey-green I hadn't seen in 3 years, and had thought, until that instant, I'd never see again outside of memory. "Elsie," I said, and my voice broke clean in half on the second word. "My name is Rosalind Farrow. I believe, I am your mother." She didn't faint, didn't cry out, didn't slam the door. None of the things I'd half braced for in the wild imagining of that moment across 3 days of walking toward it. She went very still instead, the way a person goes still when something they've carried as an unanswered question their whole life is suddenly, without warning, being answered. "Sister Margaret sent word," she said, slowly. "A boy came running, not 10 minutes past. Said a woman had come asking after a girl left at the chapel. 12 years gone." Her eyes moved between my face and Vika's, and something in her expression shifted, working through an arithmetic of her own. I did not let myself believe it would be true. I have had people ask after children before. It has never once been about me. "I burned a blanket getting you out of a fire," I said, and found the words coming easier now, the ice of the first shock cracking into something more like the flood that follows it. "I've kept the scrap of it that survived for 12 years, in a drawer I open more often than I've ever told anyone. Vika here is the one who carried you out of that fire and left you somewhere safe, because she couldn't keep you safe herself, not with what was hunting her own people that season." Elsie looked at Vika a long moment, really looked, taking her in properly for the first time. "You watched from the tree line," she said. "Sister Margaret told me that story once, years back. A figure at the edge of the wood who stayed the better part of a day before walking on. I used to imagine, as a girl, that it might have been someone who loved me too much to say goodbye properly." Her voice caught slightly. "I did not know until this exact moment that I might have been right." "You were right," Vika said, quiet, and I watched something pass between the two of them that had nothing at all to do with me. 12 years of a story, finally meeting the person it had been about all along. We didn't get long with it, that reunion, a handful of minutes, questions half started and half answered, before the sound that ended it arrived from the road. Hooves, several sets, moving at a pace with none of Voss's usual unhurried patience left in it. "He knows," Sora said, already at the window, already reading the situation, with the particular speed of someone who'd been doing this kind of reading her whole adult life. "Someone in the village talked. He's not asking questions anymore." Yenna was moving before anyone else had finished processing the sound, pulling Elsie back from the window, positioning herself between the door and the rest of us, with the same instinct I'd watched her arrive at my own door with 3 nights before. "How many?" she said. "4, perhaps 5 by the sound of it," Sora said. "Close. Very close." I looked at Elsie, my daughter, a stranger to me in every practical sense, and yet somehow already entirely mine again in the way that mattered, and felt every ounce of the fear I'd have expected settle into something harder and steadier instead. I'd already lost her once, to fire and chaos I hadn't been able to control. I was not losing her a second time, to a man on a horse I had every intention of standing in front of, if it came to that. "There's a root cellar," Elsie said, quick, already moving. "Under the floor. My master uses it for storing herb through winter. It's small, but it'll do," Yenna said. "Go, all of you. I'll hold the door as long as I need to." "Not alone," Vika said. Immediate. Absolute. 12 years of carrying one secret alone had apparently taught her exactly how much she wasn't willing to let her sister carry the next one by herself. Yenna looked at her a beat, then nodded, once, and didn't argue it. I'm not going to give you every detail of what happened in the next several minutes, because I spent most of them crouched in a root cellar with my hand over my own daughter's mouth, listening to sounds I couldn't properly identify, and praying in a way I hadn't prayed since the fever took my husband. What I know, pieced together after, is this. Voss came to the door himself, 6 men behind him, and found it held by 2 orc women with nothing to lose and a full season's worth of grief and fury behind every motion. It was not a long fight. It was not, by Yenna's own account afterward, meant to be a fight they won outright. Only one they held long enough. Long enough turned out to be long enough. A village doesn't stay quiet through that kind of commotion, and Millhaven's people, chapel taught for generations in the particular stubbornness of standing up for strangers at their door, came out of their houses with whatever they had to hand. A blacksmith with his hammer, 2 farmhands with pitchforks, Sister Margaret herself at the front of a small, determined crowd, with nothing more than her own unshakable presence as a weapon. Voss, by every account I've heard since, was a practical man above all else. He looked at the numbers, his 6 against a village's worth of angry neighbors, and 2 orc women who clearly weren't backing down, and made the same calculation any professional makes when a job stops being worth its cost. He rode out of Millhaven before the hour was through, and I've never heard, in all the time since, that he came looking for any of us again. When Elsie finally led me back up out of that cellar, into a cottage still smelling of crushed herb and spilled lamp oil, Yenna was sitting on the floor, with a cut along one arm that Sora was already binding, and Vika beside her, unhurt, holding her sister's free hand, the way you hold on to something you nearly lost, twice in as many minutes. Nobody said very much for a while. There wasn't much left that needed saying just then. We'd all of us, in our different ways, come through the exact fire we'd set out to walk through. It took us 4 days to walk back to Ashbourne. Slower than the road out, because now there were 5 of us instead of 4. And one of those 5 had a healer's whole apprenticeship worth of belongings she wasn't willing to leave behind, without at least trying to carry the useful parts of it herself. Elsie asked me, somewhere on the 2nd day, whether the farm had chickens. I told her it did. 6 of them, badly behaved, and worse fed than they ought to be, given how long I'd been distracted from ordinary chores by considerably larger matters. She said she'd always wanted chickens. Sister Margaret had never allowed them at the chapel, on account of a long-standing grievance with a rooster some years before Elsie's time that nobody had fully explained to her. I found myself laughing at that. Properly laughing. On a dusty road, with a daughter I'd known 4 days, and a lifetime both at once. I hadn't laughed like that in longer than I could easily account for. Yenna's arm healed, slow but clean. Sora fussed over the wound the whole way home, checking the binding twice a day, whether it needed checking or not, which Yenna endured with the particular patience of someone who understood exactly what that fussing was actually about, and let her sister have it anyway. The gate latch was still loose. Of course it was. I stood there on the 4th evening, looking at it, same as I had the night the storm first brought 3 strangers to my door. And this time, I didn't just think about fixing it. I did. Yenna held it steady while I worked the new pin into place. The two of us crouched in the last of the daylight, while Sora shooed the badly behaved chickens back toward their coop, and Elsie stood in the yard, just looking at everything. The house, the fields, the apple tree at the east fence, with an expression I recognized, because I'd worn it myself once, a long time back. The particular look of someone deciding a place might actually be theirs to keep. Vika found me alone in the kitchen that first night back. Same spot by the hearth where she'd sat those first 2 nights, staring at my mother's old sampler. It was still hanging there, same as always, though I'd taken the burned scrap of blanket out of the drawer that morning and set it in a small frame beside it. Because some things earn a proper place on a wall, instead of staying folded away in the dark. "I did not expect this," she said, looking at the 2 pieces of stitching hanging side by side. "Any of it. I thought I was walking into your kitchen that night looking only for shelter from a storm." "I know," I said. "So did I." I won't pretend the 5 of us settled into something simple, or that every day since has been easy. Elsie and I are still learning each other. 12 years of separate lives don't stitch back together in a season, however much either of us might want them to. Yenna and Sora have their own grief still, their own 8 lost, that no farmhouse full of chickens and apple trees is ever going to properly answer for. But there's a shape to this house now that wasn't here before. 5 places set at the table most evenings. A root cellar Elsie insisted on properly stocking before winter. Same careful instinct she'd shown in that healer's cottage under far worse circumstances. Yenna mending the fences my husband never got round to. Same patient work Vika had done, mending the fence I'd once had trouble with too, back before any of this, in a story that feels now like it happened to somebody else's life. Sora asked me once, not long after we'd settled properly, whether I minded sharing a farm, a family, a life I'd built for myself alone across 3 hard years, with 3 orc women who'd arrived on my step as strangers, running from a storm. "I buried an empty grave for 12 years, I told her, and found my voice catching on it even now, even settled, even certain. I've decided I'm rather particular these days about what I let myself call empty. This house isn't. Hasn't been. Not since the night 3 soaked strangers knocked 3 times, hard, on a door I very nearly didn't answer. The gate latch holds true now. I check it most mornings, out of habit more than need. And most mornings it's exactly where I left it, exactly as it should be. One small, ordinary thing, finally seen to, in a life that turned out to have a great deal more waiting for it than one loose latch and an empty grave ever let on. That's the whole of what I've got to tell you. A storm, a sampler on a wall, a blanket scrap that travelled 12 years in a coat pocket before it finally came home, and 5 people who found each other by accident, in the worst weather any of us could remember, and never quite managed to let each other go again.